David Almond is a British writer who was born in Newcastle on the north side of the Tyne and raised in Gateshead on the south side of the river. His writing is infused with the culture and language of the northeast. Skellig, David's debut novel, published for children in 1998, received critical acclaim, winning the Whitbread Children's Book of the Year and the Carnegie Medal. It was included in the top 10 Carnegie winners of all time for the 70th anniversary of the award. Since then, it's been adapted for theatre by David himself. It's been produced as an opera and film. A prequel, My Name is Mina, was published in 2010. Further novels include Kit's Wilderness, Secret Heart, The Fire Eaters and The Colour of the Sun, amongst many others. Illustrated fiction for younger children include My Dad's a Birdman and The Boy Who Climbed into the Moon, illustrated by Polly Dunbar, and The Boy Who Swam with Piranhas, illustrated by Oliver Jeffers. Other notable projects include a series of extraordinary colour graphic novels with artwork by Dave McKean and a haunting picture book, The Dam, illustrated by Levi Pinfold. He's also written an emotionally charged novel, War is Over, with equally haunting black and white illustrations by David Litchfield. As a body of writing for children and young people, David's work is unparalleled, so it's fitting that he should have been recognised by IBI for the Hans Christian Andersen Medal for Writing. It's an award that's given for a lifetime's achievement and contribution to children's writing. David is Emeritus Professor of Creative Writing at Bath Spa University, and today he joins me in the Reading Corner to talk about his latest novel, Bone Music. It's an extraordinary prose poem which details and amplifies in concentrated form many of the themes from earlier work. It's the first time that I have read a novel from cover to cover and immediately returned to the beginning and read from cover to cover again. So I'm especially thrilled to be welcoming David today in the Reading Corner to discover more about this very special book. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
It's a story that defies plot telling, I would say. It's a story about what it means to be human with all of its contradictions. It's a story about our relationship with the world that we inhabit. And it's told through the eyes of the main character, Sylvia. She's a city girl, and it's her experience of transformation when she visits Kielder Forest and Kielder Water. So, David, this is an area that you've written about not so long ago in your picture book, The Dam. That was about Kielder Water and Kielder Forest. Can I ask you, first of all, whether Bone Music grew out of that?
It did. It has really close connections to it. When I wrote The Dam, I was really influenced by music, especially by the music of Catherine Tickell. It's the story of Catherine when she was a young girl and an amazing day that she had with her father in Kielder before the valley was flooded. So I was really listening to Catherine's music and thinking about Kielder and thinking about the relationship between the landscape and song and the music. And then I kind of knew I wanted to write about that area again and those kind of issues again. Didn't quite know how to do it, but I knew it was something about wildness and wilderness and the forest. And then I listened to Catherine's, one of her most recent albums called Hollowbone. At the heart of it is the idea that a hollowbone, one of the first ever musical instruments, is still kind of necessary to know about today. So I kind of researched a bit about hollowbones, how they were made, why they were made, when they were used, and everything just took off. I knew the hollowbone was going to be at the heart of this story.
When did you know that this girl, Sylvia, was going to be the vehicle for your story? I mean, Sylvia, she's real, and she's definitely more than a symbol, but she does represent the potential in all young people.
Yeah, I wanted to write about a kind of, an ordinary lass, a Newcastle lass, which is what she is. She loves the city, she loves her friends. She's very modern in the sense that they go on protests against climate change, to complain about desperate politicians. She has a very strong friendship group. So, I mean, I've got a daughter who's now in her 20s, but her teenage years were very kind of important to me and very influential to see how she and her friends behaved and got on with each other. And I was thinking about young people in the world today and the challenges that they face, but how brave they seem to be and how determined to forge a life despite everything. And it's really interesting to watch young people interviewed on TV when they're talking about maybe education or talking about climate change. And so many of them, when they begin to speak, they put our politicians to shame. Mm. And so I wanted to write about a girl like that. And she leaves the city. One of the great things about the Northeast is it's kind of very urban at the heart of it. But beyond the kind of the city, there is huge open spaces and real wilderness and a sense of kind of magnificence and a sense of weird freedom and also a kind of very ancient feel too. So I wanted to take her from the city into that kind of place and kind of see what happened, really.
Mm. I mean, she is reluctant at first, but that reluctance actually dissipates quite quickly.
Yeah.
In the novel. The place that she goes to is a village just on the edge of Kielder forest, which of course is a man-made or human-made environment, isn't it? Both the water and the forest itself.
It is, that's right. But beneath that kind of modernness, there exists a kind of very ancient feel, an ancient land. So I was interested in that sense of something very modern being grown, being flooded on something which is in fact very ancient. And I think some of that you can hear in the music. Some of the kind of Northumbrian folk music, of course, predates the forest. It predates the lake. So I wanted to draw on that sense of ancient forces, ancient music, and to take Sylvia into that place. And one of the things that was lovely to write about was how she begins to sense that kind of ancientness that exists there.
Mm. Sylvia has learnt to play the recorder at school. Yeah. She's introduced to the bone flute through meeting this young man, Gabriel. He's also gone there for some kind of restoration. Tell us a little bit about Gabriel.
I knew she was going to meet somebody, but I wasn't quite sure who it was going to be. I don't plot. In that sense, I never know exactly who's going to meet who. But through the agency of his brother, Colin, who's young, she comes across this boy called Gabriel. And Gabriel is a very bright boy. He was kind of pushed at school. They wanted him to do his GCSEs early. They wanted him to do his A-levels early. So he was a kind of example, I guess, of kids who are kind of, in my opinion, pushed too hard. You know, you've got to strive, you've got to succeed, you've got to get fantastic grades, you've got to get to Oxford. And he kind of recalls from that, and it also correlates with his mother having died quite recently. So his father has taken Gabriel and his brother Colin to Kielder, to the forest, to the village, to try to kind of recuperate, to regenerate. And in the forest and in the landscape in the fells, Gabriel has discovered his own kind of freedom. But what was interesting to me was that he still feels held back by, he says, my brain's too big. I'm too clever. So he's got the kind of cleverness that isn't like Sylvia's cleverness. And he recognizes in her a kind of much more free and imaginative cleverness than he has.
There's a lot of very profound ideas floating around, a lot to do with time in the novel and how time is experienced by people. And one of those is through dream and dreaming. There seems to me that there's a sort of clarity that comes to Sylvia through dreaming.
I think so. And I think, again, it's that thing where the intellect becomes more diffuse and the barriers between the intellect and the world itself. She moves through the intellect into the imagination, into the sense of ancientness, and slips into a different kind of time, which I think, in a sense, we all experience that. I think we all kind of feel that the separation between us and the world is actually not as clear-cut as we have been brought up to think that there is a kind of fluidity between humanity, and of course there is, and the natural world. There's a fluidity between our intellects and our imaginations. There's a fluidity between kind of truth and dreams.
So, David, I wonder if you would read us a bit where Sylvia is in the forest and falls into her dream-like state.
Yeah. She lay by the rock by the great tree, with her arms outstretched, like the buzzard, the totem poles, the dangling Christ. The girl in the shift and the seashell necklace sat calmly in the moonlight at her side. Did Sylvia sleep or did she die? Like the totem poles and the buzzard, she changed. She began to turn to earth. Her flesh and her bones decayed. Spiders and beetles crawled over her. Worms slid through her. Maggots fed on her. Moisture seeped up from the ground. Dew seeped down from the air. The earth took her to itself. Rain fell on her. Breezes blew across her. Winds came, and storms and torrential rain and snow and sleet and frost and ice. There were times of bright sunshine and baking heat. And the earth turned and kept on turning, and time passed and kept on passing. And the girl faded, and other girls and other folk passed by, and some lingered close to her. And lichen, flowers, moss and ferns grew on her. Bees buzzed over her. Adders crawled across her. Rabbits burrowed in her. Badgers dug down through her. Shrubs and trees grew from her, and birds made nests in their branches and sang above her. And all these things fed on her, and took nourishment from her, and so she became these things. And bears and wolves and deer and foxes walked upon her. Children picked berries from the shrubs that grew upon her. A boy picked a linnet's egg from its nest just above her. A woman sat on the marked rock for many hours, weeping for her lost child. A couple lay upon her and loved each other, and murmured that they would love each other always. And two men fought with knives, and one man fell and crawled away, with his lifeblood draining from him. And there was the clashing and wailing sounds of battles fought nearby. And in the silence afterwards came the calling of cuckoos and owls and skylarks, and the barking of dogs and the laughter of children. And the earth kept turning, turning, and time kept passing, passing, and sun rose and fell, moon waxed and waned. Great galaxies wheeled and danced across the endless sky. And men came with implements and dug into the earth, and a forest grew around her, a forest of straight trees with thick trunks and deep dark branches. And sometimes jets now screamed through the clear air above the trees. And one quiet sunlit crystal afternoon, a soaring buzzard mewed, and there came a crack, and the buzzard fell, beating its wings in the attempt to fly free of such pain. And it fell and dangled in a tree close by her. And here came a girl and a boy, wandering together through the trees, talking of creation and destruction, to discover the feathered miracle wrought by all creation, to find a hollow bone that would make music to transcend time.
So interesting listening to you read that aloud, and you hear the kind of cadences of the language. I very much suspect that you do read your work aloud when you're writing.
I do. I kind of beat it out, yeah. Some kind of drumming, yes.
Yeah. One of the other things to do with time is the relationship of youth and age, which comes through Sylvia's encounters with Andreas, who's a former prisoner of war. And it really got me thinking. There are lots of points that you make about the baby that's still inside me. And I think maybe as you get older, certainly I'm talking from personal experience here, you become very aware of that child or that teenager,
yes,
or that person in the middle years that was you. But you become acutely aware that people only see the you that is now.
I think that's true. And I think inside us, there's us as we were all through our lives. And Sylvia experiences that. It's a really fascinating thing to think about. It was a fascinating thing to write about, that Sylvia, she's still the baby in her mother's womb, the kind of first vision of her in her mother's womb. Sylvia is still that, as well as being the person that she'll grow to be, to the adult that she'll grow to be. But
also this other Sylvia of 5,000 years ago.
Yeah.
That connection with the past.
Yeah, it was interesting. And as I was writing it, the writing on the page changed and it narrowed and went down. It became visually more song-like, more poetic, and down the page it went. And then I wrote the line, "The girl came that night." And it really was like the girl came to me as well as to Sylvia. She arrives in Sylvia's bedroom at night, and Sylvia's brave enough to actually believe that she's really there. And I think that's one of the things that Sylvia learns at various points through the novel. She has opportunity to say, no, I'm not going to think this. I'm not going to see this. I'm not going to experience this. But each time she kind of allows herself to. Here's this girl who somehow comes from 5,000 years ago. She looks very like Sylvia, and Sylvia recognizes her, a kind of kindred spirit. And then towards the end of the novel, together they have this amazing experience in the forest.
Can we talk about them creating the rock art together?
Yeah.
Maybe just say a little bit about that incident in the forest.
Yeah, so in Northumberland, there are patches of rock art that nobody knows why they're there, and nobody knows how they were made. So it was a great kind of opportunity to have my version of how Northumbrian rock art is made. So Sylvia and her friend from 5,000 years ago in the night create some rock art together. And it's almost like the rock art on the rocks reflects the amazing shapes in the sky, and also reflect the shapes inside of ourselves, the spirals inside ourselves. And one of the things about their music is the dance that they do is a kind of spiraling dance. So as I got further into the novel, I realized myself that the spiral was really important, and the kind of spiraling sense of music spiraling, and then the spiraling sense of people moving. That seemed to reflect the experience of the rock art, and it reflected the nature of the galaxies.
Mm-hmm. There's one point in the novel where Andreas talks about the splendidness of the place and how awful it would be to live amongst that splendidness and not see it.
Yeah.
And it struck me that there are two different ways of not seeing it. One is sadly that people don't have as much access to it, which makes it all the more awful that some people can live amongst it and not see it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's an important line that Andrea said. If you're surrounded by splendidness, you have to recognize it and look at it. And I think that's another thing maybe we're learning more and more. Just looking at the world is really important, and not trying to particularly do anything with it, but just seeing it, accepting it, and also adopting, I suppose, a kind of humility. This isn't something that I'm going to change. This isn't something I'm going to dominate. But say, yes, it is just absolutely marvelous.
There was one scene that I found, well, more than one scene that I found beautiful, but one that's kind of stuck in my head is when Gabriel and Sylvia find the dead buzzard and they take its wing to create their own bone flute from it. She's never done this before. Intuitively, she seems to know what to do and how to create this instrument. Am I imposing on you too much if I ask you to read a...
Not at all, no. Okay. She put it down and took up the ancient knife again. We'll have to do it the right way, she whispered. Have to do it in the proper way. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, felt the knife balanced perfectly in her hand. Tried to feel as a girl from 6,000 years ago might feel as she made her hollow bone. She began again to sew the ulna close to the elbow joint. Moved her hand back and forth, moved the stone knife back and forward across the surface of the bone. Did not press hard, remained calm, breathed slowly, let the stone edge cut at its own speed. Yes, it worked. The stone slowly cut right through the bone. She meditated again, breathed, relaxed, and started to cut again, this time close to the wrist joint. Yes, it worked. She lifted the ulna away from the other bones. It was longer than her hand, just broader than her thumb, an elegant curve to it. So strong, so frail. She raised it to the sky, peered into it, saw the light pouring through the hollow bone. She sighed. What was this strange feeling, or this sudden loss of feeling? She seemed to stop being Sylvia, seemed to stop being anything at all. She shook her head, called herself back into herself. She plunged the bone into the water again to boil infection away, lifted it out, laid it down on the table to cool and dry. "We're mad," she murmured. "Yes," said Gabriel. She raised it to her lips and blew. No note of rose came out. They inspected Gabriel's own hollow bone, saw how the mouthpiece had been smoothed and rounded. She recalled the recorder from her childhood. Gabriel brought a metal file. She shook her head. She found a flat stone on the ground. She used it as a file, slowly smoothing one end of the bone and creating the curve. She blew again. Breath flowed through more easily now, but still no note. "Needs a finger hold," she said. She gripped the knife in her palm, meditated, breathed, pressed the pointed end against the bone, twisted gently, gently, was wary again of cracking open the whole thing. But her hands and fingers and mind worked together as if somehow she knew exactly what to do. The stone bit into the bone. She twisted further into the bone. A hole was formed. She widened it with the point, smoothed the edges of the hole with the scraper, then with the stone. Plunged the bone into the boiling water again. Disappeared from herself again as she pressed the bone down into the water with the stick. Took it out again, let it cool. Lifted it to her lips and blew again. Nothing, just the sound of breath. Looked closely at it, remembered the recorder. Looked at Gabriel's hollow bone. She thought of tin whistles, clarinets, oboes. The mouthpiece should be narrower, she said, so that the breath's concentrated and then released. "Like when you whistle," he said. He shaped his lips, he whistled. They both smiled. A bird was singing in a tree nearby, notes pouring from its throat, its beak. They pondered. Fallen twigs lay under the tree. She picked one up and inspected it. No good. Another. She peeled the bark away from one of them. She cut a short section with a knife, a centimetre or so long. Started to carve and shape it with the scraper and the stone so that it might fit into the opening of the bone. She tried it, carved again, smoothed again. She shaped it so that when she pushed it into the opening of the bone, the opening would be narrower than the rest. She pressed and wedged it there. It wouldn't stay. "Needs glue," said Gabriel. "Not glue, something older." They pondered. "Egg," she muttered. He went into the house and came out with an egg in a bowl, cracked the egg into the bowl. As if she knew exactly what to do, she dipped her finger into the albumen, smeared a little onto the fragment of wood. She slipped the wood into the opening again and held it there. It didn't shift. They waited as it set. "They don't teach you this in school, do they?" he said. "As if," murmured Sylvia. She held the bone gently in her palms, then lifted it to her lips and blew. Too hard. She breathed more gently. More of a squeak than a proper note, but yes, there was the frail beginning of a note. She adjusted her breathing, gained some control. There was a note, the beginning of music. She breathed gently. The note was hardly audible. She opened and closed the finger hole as she blew. The note shifted, changed. She used the knife again to form another finger hole, smoothed it with scraper and stone. She blew again, moved her fingers onto and off the finger holes. The notes changed. She laughed, gained in confidence. Yes, she was beginning to understand how to do this thing. She held in her hands a fragile flute formed of a bone from a buzzard's wing, a flute that was like the first of all flutes. She blew through a hollow bone. Frail music was drawn from deep inside herself. It moved through her and through the bone of the bird, and it became stronger and was concentrated, then released into the empty air around herself and Gabriel. It flowed into the air of the garden and the air of Northumberland and into the high, wide Northumbrian sky. Sylvia shifted her feet as if in a dance. Sylvia was Sylvia and not Sylvia. She was the music. She was the hollow bone. She danced with Gabriel. They danced to the first music in Gabriel's garden while a bird sang above them in the tree.
Just beautiful. And of course, one of the things that the hollow bone, the bone flute does is it appears to draw the animals to her, whether they were singing before or not. They feel the animals are closer to them when they play this music.
Yeah, because that was one of the things about the hollow bone. It was to connect with a wider world, to connect with a dream world, to connect with animals, and to connect with the dead too. So it was an incantation across all kinds of supposed barriers.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about how it was written. I mentioned at the beginning So it's the first time I believe that I've ever read a novel, got to the end, and started immediately at the beginning again and read it all the way through. And I realised, or at least I think I realised, that it was because I was reading it like a poem rather than a story. And when you read poetry, that's often what you do. You go back and you reread and you reread.
Yeah, it felt like poetry, like song, a lot of it, as I was writing it. And that felt kind of the right way to do it, because it is about music, it is about songs, because the influence of sound. So it had to be something that followed that rhythm. And also the rhythm of the sections in the novel. It's not divided into chapters, it's divided into small scenes. And some of them are quite small, very short poetic scenes with a kind of spiral logo in between them. And that seemed important to me as well. It's like moving from step to step to step to step. And the steps that they took are like the steps in I suppose, in a song or in a poem, getting towards what had to happen in the forest. And at times, the writing almost by itself began to narrow on the page automatically. It seemed the only way to do it.
There was one point, I think, where it was almost like incantation. So it's where she's just feeling how to play the bone lute. And it just becomes very much, it is just a poem at that point. And that contrasts quite a lot, I felt, with later, where it's the dream and then it becomes much more expansive, the text, when you look at it on the page. How much of that is thought through and how much of it is just instinctive?
By the time I got to those sections, it was really pretty instinctive. I knew how they had to be. And the thing about the incantation, that seems more and more important to me. It's like, because it deals with ancient forces, this book, if we think about how stories were told at the beginning of human time, they would often be presented, I'm sure, as incantations. They were spell-like. They had a kind of magical force to them. And I guess when I was writing this, I was hoping to kind of draw on some of that incantatory feeling. And then when I got to the dream, suddenly there's this block of prose, which I think lasts for 2 pages. And it just seemed the right way to do that too, because she's inside something there. It's all around her. It's like she's inside those pages, experiencing it.
There was one image that struck me, the fallen crucifix by the old chapel, which is hanging by just one hand. And at the end of the novel, Gabriel puts that back. The
thing that got me about the Christ on the cross is that it, again, thinking about the buzzard, it's the same shape as the buzzard. It's the same shape as the buzzard falling in flight. And one of the things that happens to Sylvia in the forest is she was kind of, in a sense, she almost dies. She dies, goes back to the past, and is reborn. And the whole point about the kind of Christ image is that it is about that. It's about death and rebirth. So I think that's why it became important to me. And I thought about getting rid of it, especially with me, with my Catholic childhood. I thought, do I want to have this? But then I thought, well, it does have this mythic force to it. So instead of getting rid of it, I thought, let's nail him back up again to say, and then I think the line is, he's not going anywhere. It's not that I'm saying that Christianity is not going anywhere, but there's something about the symbolism of Christ dying and being reborn, which just matched everything that I was writing about in the novel.
But at the end of the day, it's a story of great hope, because as we've said, although she's a real girl, she is that potential of all the young people out there. And she has, when she does, or if she eventually goes back to Newcastle, she has all of this experience to take with her.
I think that's right. She goes back to the city at the end and she meets her friends, and they're going to a protest in the middle of Newcastle. But she's brought with her all that experience of being rewilded. She's brought that open space. She's brought the wilderness. She's brought the past into the present. So she is a kind of figure who's had a profound experience in time and in space, and is coming back to her friends and to her society. And she has been rewilded and renewed, I hope.
It's a very beautiful novel, David, and I loved it so much. I can't wait to read it for a third time,
Thank you.
A fifth time. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Nikki. Thank you.
In the Reading Corner is presented by Nikki Gamble and produced by Alison Hughes. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please do leave a review for us. To find out about other projects, including an audience with events and the Exploring Children's Literature Summer School, visit www.exploringchildrensliterature.uk. Join us again soon in the Reading Corner on your favourite podcast platform.